I mean, I can't speak on the entire AI market because there's a lot of
Of
different
course.
niches. There's marketing, sales, but I think software development is definitely a hotbed, because coding agents are particularly good at writing code, and it's easy to test the output, whether it works or not. So I feel like in the software development side of things, I mean, we've seen the rise of like Cursor and
Hmm.
Windsurf, which just went through this crazy acquisition ordeal. And they're more on the coding level, coding assistant level to enhance coders' abilities. And I think that's helping, everybody in software move faster. But it's not entirely useful to those that are non-technical. And I would say, the way that Cursor, Claude Code, these coding agents work is kind of brute force, where you have to, I mean, they even call it vibe coding now, where, you're giving it an instruction and it's trying to follow um, what you said, but it might not completely understand the entire context. So I feel like that's the main issue, is that there's a lot of competition in this coding agent space. There's like, you know, 50, 60 different companies, and they're at different stages. Like you have Cursor at the IDE stage, you got like Lovable and V0 at the prototyping full stack app stage. But they all suffer from the common problem, I feel, of scalability, right?
Hmm.
So cursor and stuff is good. Like, okay, yeah, it's manned by an engineer, so that engineer has knowledge and can keep it in check. But from my experience, it's still tricky. You're walking a fine line, because if it adds a bunch of code and you don't know what it's doing, then you have to audit that really carefully. And then you have like the lovables and V0s, which are giving power to the people to create apps, people that didn't know how to code prior,
Hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily get them to the finish line. It gives them like a solid first version, and then if you need to iterate on top of it, it's slow, it's clunky, and then you end up with some spaghetti. So if the goal was to get to a working piece of software, it's you know it doesn't do the job, although it is inspiring like a whole generation of people to now get into software, which I think is huge.
100%. And I think, kind of just to reiterate what you said, and some of the topics that we've talked about in the podcast before have been really related to this, in the sense that it would be really hard for a non-tech founder to use one of these tools and develop a software, right? Just from off the bat, with just, okay, can you code this for me? And then, like you said, it might give you a good base model, but it's not going to give you that end product and that MVP that you really need to go to market.
Exactly, exactly. And if you really think about it, like what's the goal? Like if you're a founder, the goal is to get a functional product to your customers. And if
Hmm.
that's the goal, I feel like the current like coding agents just don't do the job. And you do need developers at the end of the day. Where
Right.
we're at right now in the AI market, you do need a developer who has like Cursor, right? And they could actually like take a say like you do a first version in Lovable or
Hmm.
V0, and then you give it to a developer that has Cursor, they could get you there, and they could
Right.
get you there fast. But by yourself, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky.
Definitely. And that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I've kind of been hearing across the board. And on that topic, in relation to pre-dev, what unique advantage do you guys have in the AI coding agent race kind of right now?
Yeah, so it's funny you asked that, because we didn't actually plan to be in the coding agent race at all from the start. So we actually started more on the dev consulting side of things,
Hmm.
right? Where
Right.
whenever you're hiring or outsourcing development work, you have to break the project into milestones and then come up with, a cost, a scope. And, the more vague that is, the more disagreements might come about as the project goes. So the first problem we were solving was, okay, if you're a non-technical person, how do you communicate your requirements to the developer, any
Of
developer?
course.
So, we started with that idea to master basically planning in that spec layer. And then what we noticed as a side effect is that, okay, well, maybe the code isn't the hardest part. Like maybe if you have a really, really good spec, then writing the code is actually trivial. So like our goal is just to, create a blueprint so good that the code almost writes itself. And, as we were developing this technology, we went to basically our go to market was to target development agencies and clients like startups. So if a client is looking to build, we give them a transparent estimate timeline of their project and then match them with developers. And then that conversation is like facilitated. It's a lot easier. Um, and then we also the next step after that was, using pre.dev with your own team. So if you have an engineering team and you weren't outsourcing, you could connect it to Jira. So it's almost like you could get started instantly, or if you needed to change your backlog and roadmap on the fly, that process is like hell for a PM or
Right.
engineering manager, um, if you have hundreds of tickets. So pre.dev like makes it easy. You can just change your entire roadmap on the fly. And then we did this basically the first year, and then we were kind of venturing into code generation, and we came up with our own, coding agent that we plugged into our spec. So that was like
Okay.
the magic formula. And I think that's to answer the question, that's the advantage we have is that we've we have the best planning layer by far. Maybe the second best is like Claude Code has like a plan mode on it, right? But
Hmm.
their plan mode is just unstructured. And I think because we're upstream, right? It's easier to swim downstream than upstream. um because we focused on that almost like PM layer, we are like the PM of the coding agents. So we could plug into in the future Devin, Claude Code, Cursor, V0 Lovable, all of them, and provide them with such a good prompt that the user doesn't really have to describe code level changes to the um coding agent.
That's awesome. And I think that's super innovative and it really touches on a lot of topics that are trending right now. And I think it would be a huge help to a lot of people, even some of the viewers that are watching this podcast, especially in the non-tech space. Like for me, when I do day trading before I run the business with my partner, but something that was really hard for me was building the algorithm that I use to trade, and gives indicators and things like that. And what's available in that specific market isn't like good enough for what I need. So I had to go back and build it. But at that time I had no tech experience. So I had to go learn the language. I had to go ask AI and it would build out like we were talking about these base models. But from someone that was a non-tech describing this model is almost impossible, right? So and it seems like it's really solving that problem of translating it and having a middleman almost between the two so that when you do plug it in as a prompt, it's perfect, right?
Yeah, it's like a source of truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you have the problem of memory with these agents as well, even if you're trying to do what you did on ChatGPT, for instance, right?
Right.
It gets lost in the mix. It gets
Mm-hmm.
lost across chats, and you're piecing together information, you're putting it into a doc. But with pre.dev, it has like a graph representation of your entire stack, from tech stack to user stories to the architecture itself, and then it uses that cross references the architecture, cites it in the documentation it provides you. So it's not just giving you a task for no reason. It's like saying, okay, well, this user story came from this message from the user, and it translates to this front end page, these backend API endpoints, these database operations. So then you have that source of truth, and then say you revise it, say something changes, like a
Mm-hmm.
database table changes, it's like it'll trickle down the graph all the way down the spec. So that source of truth, then you get a new version of it, you could revert the version. But I think there's nothing really like it. Like Cursor, Windsurf, all these guys, they try to Claude Code, they try to create a representation of your code base internally, but it's not, you know, I don't think it's at the same level that we're doing.
100%. And why do you think that is? Do you think it's issue maybe in the operation side of those companies, or do you think it's more of they're not even there yet?
No, I think that we stumbled upon this problem. So we
Hmm.
started at like a higher level, just the idea and PM level, right?
Right.
Like user stories essentially. Like Cursor doesn't know anything about the actual requirements that
Right.
your project has. It knows about how the files work together and
Hmm.
how the code is structured and what packages you're using, but there's a level that's above that that is supremely important because it has to do with business logic itself.
Right.
And I think that's actually where our product starts. So, they would have to build architecture on top of what they have, whereas we've already abstracted that requirements layer and map that to the code.